My name is Zora Davenport. I am 32 years old, and tonight the manager of a five-star hotel asked me to leave because my high-end streetwear did not fit his idea of wealth. When my own sister and brother-in-law walked by, they laughed and told him to call security. I simply pulled out my phone and sent a single text. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The crystal chandeliers of the Crown Sovereign Hotel cast a warm golden glow across the imported Italian marble floors. Located right in the heart of Buckhead, Atlanta, the hotel was the ultimate playground for the city elite. It was a place where old money and new political power collided, a sanctuary for those who desperately needed to prove their status to everyone else. I walked through the towering glass doors feeling perfectly comfortable in my pristine white sneakers, tailored joggers, and an oversized designer hoodie. The fabric was spun silk and cashmere, a subtle luxury that flew right over the heads of people who only respected flashy logos and traditional ball gowns. I had barely taken 10 steps toward the grand staircase when a man in a stiff charcoal suit stepped directly into my path. His brass name tag read, "Preston Guest Relations Manager." He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my braided hair and my casual attire with an expression of thinly veiled disgust. His posture was rigid, blocking my way completely as he clasped his hands in front of him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with that specific type of corporate condescension reserved for people he deemed entirely unworthy. "The public restrooms are located across the street at the transit station. I must ask you to exit the premises immediately." I stopped and looked at him, keeping my expression entirely neutral. I had dealt with men like Preston my entire life. Men who looked at a young black woman and instantly calculated her worth based on their own narrow prejudices. "I am not looking for the restroom," I replied evenly. "I am here for an event in the main ballroom." Preston let out a short, patronizing laugh that echoed slightly in the vast lobby. I highly doubt that he said, stepping even closer to intimidate me. "The Crown Sovereign is currently hosting a private high-security gala for Atlanta's most prominent families. This is a five-star establishment, not a public recreation center. People like you do not belong in this section of the hotel, and I will not allow you to loiter and disturb our paying guests. Turn around and walk out those doors before I am forced to have you removed." The racial undertones and classist assumptions hung heavily in the air between us. He saw my natural braids and my hoodie, and he immediately assumed I was a trespasser wandering in from a lower-income neighborhood. I stood my ground, refusing to shrink under his judgmental gaze. "I am a guest of the Davenport and Vance family," I stated clearly. "I am attending the campaign fundraiser for DeAndre Vance." Preston scoffed, shaking his head as if I had just told the most absurd lie he had ever heard in his entire career. He reached for the radio clip to his belt. "That is quite enough," he snapped. "I know the Vance family personally, and they certainly do not associate with street elements. Security, we have a trespasser at the main entrance requesting immediate escort." As he spoke into his radio, the polished mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung open. A wave of smooth jazz and the clinking of expensive crystal spilled into the lobby. Out walked my older sister Chloe, draped in a glittering emerald gown, clinging tightly to the arm of her husband, DeAndre Vance. DeAndre was wearing a custom tuxedo, flashing his signature charismatic smile that he used for his city council campaign posters. They were the picture-perfect image of the black elite, exactly what our mother had groomed them to be from the moment they were born. Chloe spotted me first, and her smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer mortification. Preston turned and saw them approaching. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance." Preston said, his tone instantly shifting from aggressive to completely subservient. "I am so sorry for this disruption. This woman is making wild claims about being on your guest list. I am having security handle it right now." I looked directly at DeAndre, waiting for him to correct the manager and defuse the situation. Instead, DeAndre looked at my clothes, then at the wealthy donors mingling near the ballroom entrance, and finally back at Preston. DeAndre straightened his lapels and offered Preston a smooth, practiced nod. You are doing your job perfectly, Preston. DeAndre said, his voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. We absolutely do not know her. She is certainly not on the VIP list for my campaign dinner tonight. Please make sure she is escorted entirely off the property. The betrayal hit me, but I refused to show any emotion. DeAndre was willing to let a racist hotel manager throw his own sister-in-law onto the street just to maintain his pristine, carefully curated political image. Chloe stepped forward, her face flushed with anger as she looked me up and down. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, stepping close enough so only I could hear the venom in her voice. "You show up to the most important night of my husband's political career looking like a vagrant. You are embarrassing us in front of the entire congregation and half the city council." I looked at my sister, marveling at how completely she had surrendered her soul to this fake society. "I am wearing clothes I like, Chloe," I replied calmly. "And I am here because our mother insisted I attend this ridiculous $100,000 party." Chloe reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a crisp $50 bill. She shoved it aggressively against my chest. "Take this and call an Uber back to whatever hood you are hanging around these days," she demanded. "You are a disgrace. You could not even finish your business degree, Zora. You dropped out and failed, and now you want to come here and ruin DeAndre's campaign with your ghetto aesthetic. Go home before you ruin everything we have built." Two large security guards in dark suits arrived flanking Preston. They glared at me, waiting for the order to physically throw me out. I let the $50 bill flutter to the marble floor between us. "I did not drop out because I failed Chloe," I said, keeping my voice steady and cold. "I dropped out because I realized they were teaching me how to work for people instead of how to own them. But you would not understand anything about ownership considering your entire life is funded by other people's money." Chloe gasped, her face twisting with rage. DeAndre stepped in front of her, pointing a threatening finger at my face. "Get her out of here now," DeAndre barked at Preston. Preston nodded eagerly and signaled the guards. "Grab her arms and take her out the back service exit," Preston ordered. "I do not want her being seen by the media out front." The guards stepped forward, reaching out with heavy hands to grab my shoulders. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I calmly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I typed a single text message to a number saved in my favorites. "Uncle Roland, your manager is about to have me arrested for wearing a hoodie." I pressed send and slid the phone back into my pocket. I looked at DeAndre, who was smirking in triumph, and then at Preston, who looked thoroughly pleased with his petty exercise of power. "You are making a terrible mistake, Preston," I said quietly. My voice was completely devoid of fear. DeAndre laughed, adjusting his expensive cufflinks. "The only mistake was yours, thinking you could walk into a five-star establishment and pretend you belong with us?" He sneered. "Security, remove her immediately." The heavy hands of the guards clamped down on my shoulders. They began to pull me backward toward the service corridors, away from the glittering lights of the ballroom. Chloe turned her back on me, looping her arm through DeAndre's as they prepared to return to their wealthy donors, entirely unbothered by the fact that they had just thrown their own blood relative out like garbage. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully preserved their public image. But they had absolutely no idea who I had become since I left their toxic household. They had no idea about the real estate empire I had quietly built, or the powerful connections I had forged while they were busy playing dress-up in country clubs. And most importantly, they had no idea that the man they were desperately hoping to impress tonight, the billionaire owner of this very hotel, was already on his way down to the lobby. The heavy hands of the security guards clamped down hard on my shoulders, their aggressive grips tightening through the thick, soft cashmere of my designer hoodie. They immediately moved to pull me backward toward the dimly lit service corridors, aggressively trying to drag me away from the glittering, opulent lights of the grand ballroom. I stood perfectly still, planting my pristine sneakers firmly against the polished marble floor, letting the cold reality of the moment wash over me. Before the broad-shouldered guards could take a second step, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer stilettos echoed fiercely across the expansive Italian marble floor. Vivian Davenport was sweeping through the crowded lobby with the urgency of a hurricane. My mother looked like a walking editorial for fake generational wealth dripping in heavy layered pearls and poured perfectly into a custom silk emerald gown that probably cost significantly more than most people made in an entire year. Her dark eyes locked onto the chaotic scene, and her perfectly contoured face contorted into a terrifying mask of absolute fury. She did not rush over to protect her daughter from being assaulted by hotel staff. She rushed over to protect her meticulously crafted brand from public scrutiny. "Release her immediately!" Vivian hissed at the guards, her voice tight and hovering barely above a venomous whisper, to avoid drawing the unwanted attention of the high society guests lingering near the heavy ballroom doors. She lunged forward, grabbing my arm with acrylic nails digging sharply into my bare wrist, and dragged me roughly behind a massive towering floral arrangement in a deeply secluded alcove of the lavish lobby. "What is fundamentally wrong with you?" My mother spat, her entire body shaking with suppressed rage. "You always have to ruin my perfect nights. Look at you. You look like a common street thug wandering in from the cold. I spent 6 exhausting months curating this pristine family image for the bishop and the entire Atlanta City Council, and you deliberately show up looking like you belong in a downtown soup kitchen." I stared at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing but profound, hollow pity. "I am wearing a custom designer jacket, Mother," I replied, calmly, casually, adjusting my rumpled sleeves. "And I am only here tonight because you sent me 6 frantic voicemails demanding I attend this ridiculous political circus." "I demanded you attend looking like a respectable Davenport," she fired back furiously, jabbing a manicured finger directly at my chest. "But you have always been ridiculously stubborn, always fighting bitterly against the esteemed legacy I built from nothing. Why cannot you be more like your sister Chloe? Your sister married a future city councilman. She understands the necessary sacrifices for ultimate status. She is actively securing our family name in the history books, while you are out there playing urban savior in the slums, buying up ruined, rotting properties with pocket change. You are a complete, utter embarrassment to absolutely everything I stand for in this community." The blatant, unapologetic favoritism was certainly not new. It had been the relentless, toxic soundtrack of my entire 32 years on this earth. Chloe was the undisputed golden child, the perfect compliant doll who married strictly for status, while I was the dark sheep who dared to work hard with my hands and build real, tangible wealth from the ground up. "If Chloe is securing the family name so spectacularly well," I said, keeping my tone deadly flat and uncompromising, "why exactly are you dragging me into the shadows instead of enjoying her perfect husband's grand speech?" Vivian glared at me with an intense, burning hatred that could melt solid glass. She reached frantically into her heavily beaded clutch, pulled out a thick folded piece of premium ivory paper, and shoved it aggressively against my chest. Catching it before it fluttered to the floor, I slowly unfolded the document. It was a formal, itemized invoice from the Crown Sovereign Hotel, officially stamped with today's date. The total balance currently due for the ballroom rental, the premium seafood catering, and the top-shelf liquor was exactly $100,000. "You are going to march straight over to the concierge desk and pay this bill right now," Vivian demanded, crossing her arms defensively. "Max out those little freelance credit cards of yours. Empty whatever meager savings you have scrounged up from your little anti-gentrification hobby. Consider it your mandatory rent for carrying the prestigious Davenport name tonight." I looked down at the massive 6-figure bill, a harsh, humorless laugh escaping my lips. "Rent for carrying your name?" I asked, holding the crumpled paper up to the light. "You mean the exact same way my college education fund was considered rent?" Vivian aggressively rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly in the quiet alcove. "We are absolutely not bringing up ancient history right now, Zora. DeAndre desperately needs this gala to secure his election tomorrow." "It is not ancient history," I fired back, my voice turning to absolute ice. "You completely drained $150,000 from my private academic trust fund, so DeAndre could buy a flashy fleet of bulletproof Cadillac Escalades for his political campaign image. You knowingly forged my signature on the bank withdrawal slips. You called it a necessary family investment when you literally stole my entire future just to buy your arrogant son-in-law some shiny new toys. You were struggling terribly in your business classes anyway. Vivian snapped, entirely unrepentant and devoid of any maternal guilt. You foolishly wanted to build cheap housing for poor, ungrateful people. DeAndre is actually going to be somebody powerful. His political success elevates all of us to the absolute top. I made a strategic executive decision as the matriarch of this family to properly allocate our resources where they would actually yield a significant return. Now stop your endless whining, take out your wallet, and pay this invoice immediately before the hotel manager completely shuts down the open bar. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the pure, unfiltered delusion. She honestly believed she possessed the absolute right to steal my money, deliberately sabotage my education, and then demand I foot the exorbitant bill for a massive party celebrating the very man who directly benefited from her outright theft. I am not paying a single solitary dime for DeAndre's fake political theater, I stated firmly, stepping away from the overwhelming floral arrangement. Tell Chloe to sell one of her gaudy diamond necklaces. Before Vivian could launch into another screaming, hysterical fit, the sharp, aggressive clack of tall stilettos echoed loudly into the alcove. Tasha Vance, DeAndre's older sister and self-appointed ruthless campaign manager, marched aggressively into our secluded corner. She was delicately holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne, her nose turned up in a permanent ugly sneer of sheer superiority. Is she desperately begging for handouts again? Vivian, Tasha asked. Looking at me as if I were something vile, she had accidentally scraped off the bottom of her designer shoe. Tasha was the ultimate shameless social climber, a bitter woman whose entire personality was obsessively wrapped up in close proximity to power. She had spent the last 5 exhausting years acting as the ruthless gatekeeper to DeAndre, treating my entire family like convenient disposable stepping stones. DeAndre is about to take the main stage in exactly 10 minutes. Tasha continued, arrogantly swirling her bubbly champagne. We absolutely do not have time to deal with your insanely jealous, chronically broke daughter making a pathetic scene in the lobby. I am not making a scene, Tasha, I replied, my voice remarkably steady and calm. I am simply refusing to blindly pay your brother's outrageously expensive $100,000 bar tab. Tasha laughed, a harsh, grating, deeply unpleasant sound that grated against my ears. She turned abruptly and waved her hand imperiously. Preston Sterling, the highly snooty hotel manager who had aggressively tried to kick me out moments earlier, suddenly appeared from behind the thick marble pillar. He had clearly followed my mother, waiting silently, like an obedient, desperate lapdog, for the wealthy patrons to give him a strict order. Preston, Tasha commanded, pointing her expensive champagne flute directly at my face. This woman is illegally trespassing on private property. She is refusing to settle the outstanding account, and she is actively threatening the physical safety of our high-profile political donors. Call the police and have her arrested and removed immediately. Preston puffed out his chest proudly, completely emboldened by Tasha's aggressive directive. With extreme pleasure, Miss Vance. I explicitly told her earlier that her specific kind does not ever belong in a luxury establishment like ours. I will contact the proper authorities right now. Vivian stood idly by her arms, crossed tightly, a deeply smug, satisfied smile of victory slowly spreading across her meticulously painted face. She was completely, unconditionally willing to let her own flesh and blood be arrested and humiliated, rather than openly admit she could not actually afford the very extravagant party she was currently hosting. She firmly believed that forcing me into a tight corner with the terrifying threat of police action would make me mentally break exactly like it used to when I was a helpless teenager trapped under her toxic roof. Zora, Vivian said, her tone suddenly dripping with sickening mock sympathy. Just hand over your credit cards right now, and I will personally tell Preston to cancel the police call. Do not force us to do this the hard way. I slowly looked down at the crisp invoice still resting in my hand. I looked up at Tasha's arrogant, victorious smirk. I looked deeply into Vivian's cold, manipulative stare. Then, with slow, deliberate, agonizing precision, I folded the thick ivory paper neatly in half. I firmly grabbed the top edge and ripped it straight down the middle. "What on earth are you doing?" Tasha gasped loudly, her heavily lashed eyes widening in sheer shock. I smoothly placed the two halves together and forcefully ripped them again, deliberately tearing the $100,000 bill into tiny, jagged, worthless quarters. I reached forward and casually dropped the shredded pieces directly into Tasha's expensive champagne glass. The thick paper instantly soaked up the expensive bubbly liquid, quickly sinking to the bottom in a soggy, completely ruined, pathetic mess. "Pay your own debts," I said, looking Tasha dead in the eye with absolute, unwavering confidence. Preston frantically pulled his bulky security radio to his mouth and aggressively barked an urgent order to the front desk staff. "Dial 911 immediately. We have a highly hostile, dangerous trespasser refusing to leave the VIP lobby area." Almost exactly on cue, the faint, piercing, unmistakable wail of police sirens could suddenly be heard echoing loudly from the busy, congested Atlanta streets outside, growing significantly louder as they rapidly approached the grand front entrance of the luxury hotel. Vivian smirked broadly, proudly, adjusting her expensive pearl necklace, clearly believing she had finally won the ultimate battle, and that my professional reputation was completely permanently finished. Suddenly, the heavy, intricately carved gold-plated doors of the exclusive VIP private elevator let out a sharp, incredibly resonant, echoing ding. The heavy metallic sound cut violently through the thick, palpable tension like a sharpened blade. The massive doors slid open smoothly, and the entire chaotic, bustling lobby went completely, breathlessly, terrifyingly silent. The heavy gold-plated doors of the VIP elevator glided apart with a smooth, expensive hum. The frantic, aggressive energy of the lobby instantly evaporated. Every single eye turned toward the man stepping out from the plush velvet interior. Roland Pierce was an absolute legend in Atlanta and far beyond. At 65 years old, the self-made African-American billionaire possessed a commanding, magnetic presence that required absolutely no introduction. He wore a sharply tailored midnight blue suit that whispered quiet luxury, his silver hair cropped close, his posture completely unyielding. Flanked closely by four massive, broad-shouldered security personnel with coiled earpieces, Roland moved with the effortless, powerful grace of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. And in this particular case, he literally did. The Crown Sovereign Hotel was merely one sparkling jewel in his vast international real estate empire. As Roland stepped deliberately onto the imported Italian marble floor, DeAndre Vance's eyes widened to the size of dinner saucers. DeAndre recognized the billionaire instantly. This was the exact man DeAndre had been desperately trying to secure a private meeting with for 6 agonizing months. A single campaign endorsement from Roland Pierce guaranteed a massive landslide victory in the highly competitive city council race. DeAndre completely forgot about the shattered champagne glass, the impending police arrival, and his own sister-in-law standing right next to him. His political survival instincts took over in a frantic, blinding rush of pure adrenaline. DeAndre physically shoved past me, his shoulder, roughly clipping my arm as he practically sprinted across the expansive lobby. He frantically smoothed his custom tuxedo jacket, flashing his absolute brightest, most practiced political smile. He thrust his right hand out enthusiastically, stepping directly into Roland's path, desperate for a connection. "Mr. Pierce, what an absolute honor," DeAndre beamed, projecting his voice loudly. "I am DeAndre Vance, running for City Council for the 5th District. My family and I are hosting our primary gala in your spectacular ballroom tonight. We have been praying you might make a brief appearance." Roland did not break his smooth, calculating stride. He did not slow down. He did not even blink. He looked down at DeAndre's outstretched, desperately sweating hand, as if it were a piece of stray lint floating aimlessly in the air. Without uttering a single syllable, Roland smoothly bypassed the aspiring politician. His security detail seamlessly parted like rushing water, moving DeAndre out of the way with a firm, practiced shoulder nudge that left my brother-in-law stumbling awkwardly backward in his shiny leather shoes. The utter wordless dismissal was absolutely devastating. DeAndre stood perfectly frozen, his hands still hovering foolishly in the empty space, his perfectly curated smile completely dying on his face. He watched in sheer unadulterated confusion as the most powerful man in the entire city walked purposefully past the wealthy donors, past the trembling hotel manager, and straight toward the secluded alcove where my mother and sister were still glaring at me. Roland completely bypassed the gawking onlookers and stepped directly up to me. The stern, highly intimidating billionaire mask instantly melted from his face, quickly replaced by a warm, radiant smile that reached deeply into his dark eyes. He opened his arms wide and pulled me into a massive bear hug embrace, the kind of genuine, unconditional affection I had never once experienced from my own flesh and blood. "Sorry I am late, kiddo." Roland chuckled affectionately, his deep, resonant voice carrying easily across the dead silent lobby. The evening traffic on Peachtree Street was an absolute nightmare, but I clearly see you handled yourself perfectly fine without me. He pulled back, keeping a firm, highly protective fatherly hand resting heavily on my shoulder. Before his gaze suddenly hardened, he slowly swept his dark eyes over Preston, Tasha, Vivian, and finally Chloe. Now he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, gravelly timbre. "Who exactly is bothering the co-owner of this property?" The heavy words hit the tight space like a massive physical detonation. The psychological shock violently washing over my family's faces was an absolute masterpiece of visceral sensory devastation. Vivian's meticulously painted jaw quite literally dropped open. The vibrant color rapidly drained from her pristine face, leaving her normally warm, glowing complexion looking like sickly gray ash. Her breath hitched painfully in her throat, producing a sharp, pathetic wheezing sound as her trembling hands instinctively flew up to clutch her heavy pearls. Her manicured knuckles turned bone white from the sheer crushing pressure of her grip. She looked exactly as if the shiny marble floor had suddenly opened up to swallow her alive. Chloe violently staggered backward, her tall emerald heels wobbling unsteadily beneath her shaking legs. Her wide eyes darted wildly between my casual designer streetwear and Roland's impossibly expensive tailored suit. Her brain was violently rejecting the impossible reality unfolding right in front of her. A small, involuntary squeak of pure terror escaped her glossed lips, her chest heaving heavily as the absolute certainty of her superior social hierarchy shattered into a million irreparable pieces. DeAndre, who had finally managed to compose his footing enough to turn around, looked physically ill. A thick, heavy bead of nervous sweat rolled a slow, agonizing path down his temple, quickly soaking into the stiff, uncomfortable collar of his custom tuxedo. His perfectly manicured political facade completely disintegrated, leaving behind the terrified, wide-eyed expression of a man who just realized he had enthusiastically handed a loaded weapon directly to his absolute worst enemy. Tasha stood perfectly paralyzed, her mouth hanging wide open, the shredded pieces of the $100,000 invoice still soaking pitifully at the bottom of her ruined champagne glass. They were entirely, utterly speechless, suffocating under the immense gravity of their catastrophic mistake. The heavy silence in the lobby amplified their profound humiliation. Every wealthy guest, every passing bellhop, and every single security guard was currently watching the powerful Vance and Davenport families mentally completely break down under the billionaire's fierce protective glare. I slowly turned my attention away from my paralyzed family and locked my eyes squarely on Preston. The hotel manager was vibrating with sheer unadulterated terror. His arrogant, condescending posture had completely collapsed. A sickeningly pale, clammy sheen coated his sweating face. He opened his trembling mouth to stammer a pathetic excuse, but I absolutely did not give him the opportunity to weave a desperate lie. "I am not looking for the restroom," I said, keeping my voice remarkably even, slicing coldly through the heavy silence. "But according to your guest relations manager, people like me do not belong in this section of the hotel. I am a street element who needs to exit the five-star premises immediately." Apparently, my specific kind does not belong in a luxury establishment, and I need to be dragged out the back service exit. Roland's posture went terrifyingly rigid. A deadly, suffocating aura radiated powerfully from the billionaire. He stepped slowly toward Preston, who was now visibly shaking, tears of absolute panic welling up in his eyes. "Mr. Pierce, I swear I did not realize," Preston stammered, his voice cracking. "She was wearing a hoodie and they said she was trespassing." "You do not have the basic human decency to treat people with respect," Roland said, his voice a low, lethal rumble echoing off the marble walls. "And you certainly do not have the intelligence to recognize the woman who quietly bought a 40% stake in this property 3 weeks ago. You are fired, Preston. Effective exactly 1 second ago." Roland snapped his fingers. 2 massive security guards immediately stepped forward. One swiftly reached out and ripped the brass name tag directly off Preston's lapel. Preston let out a loud, deeply humiliating sob, covering his face with trembling hands as his ruined career crashed down upon him. "Take his keys, strip his badge, and throw him out the back service door," Roland commanded coldly. "Let him see exactly what the alleyway looks like tonight." The guards grabbed the weeping manager and aggressively hauled him away, dragging him completely out of sight. The very moment Preston disappeared, Vivian and DeAndre miraculously recovered their senses. Pure survival instinct overrode their utter humiliation. In a sudden flash, Vivian completely switched her mask. Her face stretched into a sickeningly sweet, desperate smile. She lunged toward me, hands clasped together in pure worship. "Oh, Zora, my brilliant daughter," Vivian cooed, her voice trembling with fake adoration. "We are just so overwhelmed. We had absolutely no idea you were partnering with Mr. Pierce." DeAndre rushed forward, bobbing his head eagerly. "Zora, please introduce us. This is an incredible moment." I looked at their pathetic, groveling desperation. A slow, chilling, predatory smile stretched across my face. "Oh, I will do significantly better than an introduction," I said, my voice dripping with dark promise. "Let us go inside. I brought a very special presentation for your campaign tonight, DeAndre." The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung wide open, revealing a cavernous space bathed in the warm golden light of dozens of massive crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of Atlanta's most influential politicians, elite business owners, and prominent church leaders milled about the room, their voices creating a steady, vibrating hum of wealthy networking and political deal-making. The countless round tables were flawlessly draped in rich emerald green silk, meticulously adorned with towering, extravagant centerpieces of imported white orchids and gold-leafed hydrangeas. As I stepped over the thick brass threshold, walking shoulder to shoulder with Roland Pierce, the sheer, undeniable magnitude of DeAndre's arrogant political ambition was on full, sickening display. He had spared absolutely no expense, or rather he had spared absolutely no stolen money, to manufacture this flawless, overwhelming illusion of absolute power and undeniable prestige. The clinking of premium champagne flutes and the soft, rhythmic hum of a live jazz quartet filled the heavy air, creating a suffocating atmosphere of fake high society elegance. Roland and I bypassed the crowded, bustling outer tables and headed directly for the premier VIP table, situated front and center, practically touching the edge of the elevated main stage. This specific table was heavily guarded by thick red velvet ropes and explicitly reserved for the highest tier of campaign donors and political allies. My mother Vivian and my sister Chloe scrambled frantically behind us, their sharp, high heels clicking desperately against the polished hardwood floor as they tried desperately to keep up with Roland's commanding, unyielding stride. They were practically vibrating with a toxic, chaotic mixture of sheer terror and greedy anticipation. Vivian immediately attempted to pull a plush chair out for Roland, her face stretched into a painfully eager, desperate smile, but his massive security guards smoothly and firmly blocked her path. They effectively forced her and Chloe to take seats at the opposite far end of the large circular table, completely isolating them from the billionaire. I sat down right next to Roland, sinking deeply into the plush velvet chair, still perfectly comfortable in my oversized designer hoodie and pristine white sneakers, completely ignoring the shocked, highly judgmental stares from the surrounding elite guests who could not comprehend my presence. Up on the stage, DeAndre was already in full, undeniable panic mode. He was sweating profusely, thick, heavy beads of moisture gleaming brightly on his forehead beneath the intense, blinding theatrical spotlights. He aggressively wiped his face with a custom monogrammed silk pocket square, frantically signaling the audiovisual team to cut the background jazz music immediately. DeAndre knew he had to seize absolute control of the narrative before Roland's completely unexpected presence could be misinterpreted by the wealthy crowd. He practically ran to the sleek, clear acrylic podium, gripping the sharp edges so tightly his knuckles turned stark bone white. He forced a wide, blindingly bright smile onto his face, desperately trying to project the pristine image of a confident, composed future city councilman. The massive crowd slowly quieted down, taking their assigned seats as the bright house lights dimmed dramatically. DeAndre tapped the microphone twice, his chest heaving visibly as he stared out over the vast sea of wealthy donors, his terrified eyes inevitably locking onto the VIP table, where his billionaire savior and his supposedly worthless sister-in-law sat side by side. Thank you all so incredibly much for gathering here tonight to support my grand vision for the future of our beautiful city. DeAndre began, his voice booming powerfully through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. He possessed that smooth, highly practiced cadence of a seasoned corrupt politician, expertly hiding his underlying frantic panic beneath thick, glossy layers of manufactured charm and fake humility. Tonight is about deep family values, essential community uplift, and the undeniable transformative power of generational legacy. As I look out at all your wonderful, dedicated faces this evening, I am profoundly reminded that true, lasting success is never built entirely alone. It is built through patient mentorship, strong moral guidance, and the unwavering, unconditional support of a loving family. DeAndre gestured broadly and dramatically toward our VIP table, a sickeningly sweet, entirely manufactured smile plastered across his heavily sweating face. And speaking of the importance of family, he continued, his tone dripping with fake, cloying humility. I want to take a very special personal moment to acknowledge my incredible, resilient sister-in-law, Zora Davenport, who has joined us tonight alongside the legendary, highly esteemed Mr. Roland Pierce. A collective echoing murmur of surprise and awe rippled rapidly through the crowded ballroom as hundreds of heads turned simultaneously to look directly at our table. DeAndre gripped the acrylic podium even tighter, leaning aggressively into the microphone to deliver his ultimate desperate self-serving lie. Many of you in this room know the pristine historic Davenport name. DeAndre projected loudly, ensuring every single wealthy guest hung on his every deceptive word. But what you might not know is the highly difficult, challenging personal journey Zora has faced. When she was a deeply troubled youth, completely lost, and struggling terribly to find her proper path in life, our family stepped in immediately. We absolutely refused to give up on her potential. Chloe and I spent years actively mentoring Zora, providing her with the strict moral framework and essential family values she so desperately needed to overcome her past failures and poor decisions. We patiently taught her how to properly navigate the complex, demanding world of high-level business, and we are simply overjoyed to see her finally standing on her own 2 feet, working alongside such esteemed, powerful company as Mr. Pierce. I sat perfectly still in my velvet chair, my face an impenetrable, icy mask of cold stone. I listened quietly as DeAndre methodically and arrogantly dug his own inescapable political grave in front of the entire congregation. He was shamelessly attempting to co-opt my hard-earned independent success, blatantly lying to the wealthy crowd by claiming his fake, non-existent family values had somehow miraculously saved me from being a pathetic college dropout. He was desperately trying to claim direct personal credit for my exclusive partnership with Roland, wrapping his toxic, deeply corrupt nature in a pristine, untouchable blanket of righteous church charity and dedicated sibling devotion. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his speech was almost physically nauseating. Beside me, Roland let out a low, dangerous, rumbling scoff, his dark eyes narrowing sharply as he watched DeAndre parade arrogantly around the stage like a conquering righteous hero. But I placed a firm, calming hand on Roland's expensive suit arm, silently signaling him to wait. DeAndre was currently handing me the exact perfect rope I needed to completely hang his entire political career, and I was going fully let him weave the knot as tight as possible before I finally pulled the lever. As the massive crowd erupted into a round of polite, highly appreciative applause for DeAndre's supposedly heartfelt, deeply moving family tribute, I felt a sharp, aggressive, agonizing pinch on my right arm. Vivian had quickly and stealthily scurried around the large VIP table under the loud cover of the clapping audience. She leaned in dangerously close, her heavy layered pearl necklace scraping loudly against my shoulder, her hot, panicked breath hitting my ear as she delivered a vicious, venomous whisper meant only for me. "Do not even think about opening your ungrateful, pathetic mouth, Zora." Vivian hissed, her voice vibrating with intense, frantic malice and deep-rooted fear. "The bishop is sitting exactly 3 tables away, and the entire city zoning committee is watching our every single move tonight. You will sit here quietly, you will smile politely for the eager campaign photographers, and you will not dare embarrass this prominent family in front of Atlanta high society. If you ruin DeAndre's crucial political momentum tonight, I will personally ensure you are completely, permanently blacklisted from every single influential circle and business network in this entire city. You owe us your absolute, unwavering silence." I slowly turned my head and looked directly into my mother's terrified, malicious, deeply calculating eyes. I did not flinch. I did not look away, and I certainly did not offer her a reassuring smile. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any warmth, fear, or hesitation. I stood up smoothly from the plush, comfortable velvet chair, towering slightly over her crouched form. I calmly adjusted the front of my oversized designer hoodie, making sure the expensive, heavy silk fabric fell perfectly into place. The sudden, unexpected movement caught the immediate, sharp attention of the surrounding VIP tables. Frantic whispers broke out among the elite guests as they watched the supposedly troubled, heavily mentored youth rise independently from the billionaire's side. I completely ignored their judgmental, probing stares and walked with slow, deliberate, highly predatory steps directly down the center aisle toward the main stage. DeAndre watched me approach, his practiced, charismatic smile instantly freezing into a tight, panicked, horrifying grimace. His eyes darted nervously and frantically toward the burly security guards stationed near the stage stairs. But Roland's massive, highly trained personnel had already quietly positioned themselves, effectively blocking absolutely anyone from interfering with my direct path. I walked purposefully up the short flight of heavily carpeted stairs, my pristine sneakers making absolutely no sound as I stepped fully into the bright, blinding glare of the theatrical spotlights. DeAndre instinctively took a frantic half-step backward, his chest heaving rapidly, utterly trapped between his desperate burning need to maintain his public political composure and his absolute paralyzing terror of what I was about to do. I walked straight up to the sleek, clear acrylic podium invading his carefully curated space. I did not ask for permission. I reached out and firmly took the microphone directly from DeAndre's sweaty, visibly trembling hand. He was completely paralyzed, too stunned and too deeply afraid of Roland's watching security team to offer any physical resistance. I turned to face the massive crowd looking out over the hundreds of influential politicians, wealthy donors, and church leaders who had just eagerly applauded his blatant, disgusting lies. I raised my left hand and gave a sharp, definitive, prearranged signal to the audio-visual booth at the back of the room. DeAndre talks a lot about traditional family values and generous church charity. I said, my voice ringing out crystal clear and lethally calm across the dead silent, heavily anticipating ballroom. Let us look at the actual numbers, shall we? The massive, high-definition projector screen directly behind us instantly flashed to brilliant, blinding life. The stark, unforgiving white light of the massive high-definition projector instantly washed over DeAndre's face, turning his heavily sweating, desperate complexion a sickly pale hue. He instinctively shielded his eyes against the sudden blinding glare, staggering backward as the massive display illuminated the entire grand ballroom. I stood perfectly still at the very edge of the elevated stage, watching the collective horrifying realization hit hundreds of Atlanta's most elite citizens all at once. The giant screen was perfectly divided down the exact middle, displaying two highly detailed, undeniably clear financial documents side by side for everyone to scrutinize. On the left side of the split screen sat the itemized, incredibly excessive invoice from the Crown Sovereign Hotel. It was the exact same piece of premium ivory paper my mother had violently shoved into my chest an hour ago, demanding I drain my own meager savings to cover her precious son-in-law's massive, irresponsible debt. Every single exorbitant, deeply offensive charge was magnified 10 times its normal size for the entire congregation to witness. $10,000 allocated for imported beluga caviar. $15,000 exclusively for top-shelf vintage champagne. $50,000 simply to secure the lavish ballroom space for a single night of fake political theater. The final bolded sum rested heavily at the bottom of the page, a perfect, undeniable $100,000. Next to it, occupying the right side of the glowing screen, was a highly classified official banking document. It bore the unmistakable ornate gold seal of the First Zion Community Church. It was a finalized, time-stamped wire transfer receipt executed exactly 48 hours prior. The total amount transferred from the bank flawlessly matched the hotel invoice down to the absolute final cent. But the truly damning detail, the specific line item that caused a collective, breathless gasp to ripple violently through the crowded room, was the origin account. The bold black text clearly identified the source of the funds. It read, First Zion Affordable Housing Fund. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room was absolute. You could literally hear a pin drop on the polished hardwood floor. The elite politicians, the wealthy donors, and the deeply respected church elders stared at the massive screen in sheer, unadulterated horror. The undeniable truth was staring them directly in the face. This extravagant, glittering political gala was not funded by generous, wealthy donors or grassroots campaign supporters. It was funded by money directly stolen from the absolute most vulnerable members of their very own community. DeAndre's chest heaved rapidly as he stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked frantically toward the VIP table, his terrified eyes silently begging Vivian for a lifeline. But my mother was completely paralyzed in her velvet chair, staring at the projected bank records with wide, horrified eyes, realizing her entire carefully curated social climbing existence was completely over. I paced slowly across the polished stage, the microphone gripped firmly in my right hand. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the cold, measured lethal precision of a surgeon meticulously dismantling a rotting disease. As many of you in this room are completely aware, DeAndre Vance currently serves as the esteemed financial trustee for First Zion. I stated, my voice echoing powerfully off the dripping crystal chandeliers. He was explicitly entrusted with millions of dollars in community donations, money gathered penny by penny from hardworking congregations designated specifically to build affordable housing for low-income Black families in the 5th District. Families who are being rapidly and violently priced out of their generational homes by predatory developers. Families he stands on this very stage claiming to champion and protect. I raised my hand and pointed a single unwavering finger directly at the illuminated screen behind me. Yet exactly 48 hours ago, your future city councilman authorized a direct, untraceable wire transfer from that sacred charity account to pay for this exact party. I paused, letting the heavy, undeniable truth sink deep into the audience. You are currently drinking vintage champagne bought with someone else's rent money. You are eating imported caviar paid for by displaced families begging for shelter. I tapped a small discreet remote in my palm, and the massive screen instantly shifted to a brand new set of highly detailed financial records. But his sheer unadulterated greed absolutely does not stop at tonight's gala. I continued, my voice slicing effortlessly through the growing tension in the room. Let us look closely at his highly exclusive Buckhead Country Club membership, shall we? A $50,000 initiation fee wired directly from the church's emergency medical relief fund. I tapped the remote again. How about the flashy fleet of bulletproof Cadillac Escalades currently parked outside for his campaign staff, leased entirely using the congregation's youth college scholarship endowment? DeAndre began physically shaking his knees, actually buckling slightly under the crushing weight of his public exposure. He looked desperately toward the exit doors, clearly calculating his chances of escaping the room. I methodically detailed his extensive financial crimes, breaking down the complex forensic accounting live on the microphone. I exposed the shady shell corporations he secretly set up to funnel donations, the fake consulting fees he continuously paid to his sister Tasha's completely defunct management firm, and the systematic, ruthless bleeding of a desperate community that trusted him implicitly. I stripped away his polished, charismatic political veneer layer by agonizing layer, exposing the greedy, pathetic thief hiding underneath. I clicked to the next slide, showing a complex, undeniable web of offshore accounts and fake LLCs, all tracing directly back to DeAndre's personal routing numbers, leaving absolutely zero room for plausible deniability. The initial breathless shock in the vast ballroom rapidly and violently escalated into full-blown, uncontrollable outrage. Heavy wooden chairs scraped aggressively against the floor as several prominent community leaders and wealthy donors stood up in absolute disgust, throwing their expensive linen napkins onto the tables. In the absolute dead center of the room, Bishop Thomas, the deeply respected white-haired head of First Zion, rose slowly to his feet. His face was a terrifying mask of righteous biblical fury. He pointed a trembling, commanding finger directly at DeAndre, his booming, authoritative voice cutting sharply through the rising, chaotic din, demanding an immediate, comprehensive explanation for the stolen congregation funds. Total, unadulterated pandemonium broke out across the entire venue. DeAndre completely and utterly snapped under the immense, crushing pressure. He violently abandoned the clear acrylic podium and lunged frantically toward the far side of the stage, desperately waving his sweating arms at the audio-visual technicians trapped in the elevated glass booth. "Cut the live feed!" DeAndre screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking hysterically. "Turn off that massive screen right now. I demand you cut the power." But the terrified technicians did absolutely nothing. Standing directly outside the audio-visual booth door were two of Roland Pierce's massive, unyielding security guards. They stood with their thick arms crossed, looking thoroughly unbothered and dangerously intimidating as they effectively blocked anyone from interfering with the projection equipment. Roland remained seated at the VIP table, sipping his water, with an expression of mild, detached amusement. Suddenly, the sharp, frantic clatter of tall stilettos echoed aggressively up the wooden stage stairs. Chloe was sprinting wildly toward me, her expensive emerald silk gown tearing loudly at the hem as she tripped and stumbled in her desperate blind rush to protect her fraudulent lifestyle. She was completely hysterical, her perfectly styled hair flying wildly around her tear-streaked face, her acrylic nails digging painfully into her own palms. "It is a complete, fabricated lie," Chloe shrieked hysterically at the top of her lungs, grabbing frantically at my forearm with a desperate clawing grip. "She is a psychotic liar. These banking documents are entirely photoshopped. She is just a jealous, chronically broke failure, desperately trying to ruin my perfect, successful husband. I smoothly and effortlessly stepped out of her frantic, uncoordinated grasp, letting my older sister stumble awkwardly past me, her tall heels catching on the carpeted stage. The angry, completely disillusioned crowd was absolutely not buying her pathetic, hysterical defense. The financial evidence displayed on the towering screen was simply too detailed, the official banking seals too precise to be dismissed as a petty forgery. The donors were already pulling out their phones, rapidly texting their own financial advisors and legal teams to distance themselves from the imploding campaign. Suddenly, Tasha Vance stormed aggressively up the opposite side of the stairs, her face contorted in sheer, unadulterated rage. She aggressively snatched a secondary microphone directly off its heavy metal stand. She marched forward and pointed a perfectly manicured finger dead at my face. "Don't believe a single word this bitter broke college dropout says," Tasha screamed into the microphone, her grating voice echoing violently through the chaotic room. She forged every single piece of this because she is completely psychopathically obsessed with my brother. Tasha practically vibrated with blinding, uncontrollable rage as she gripped the heavy metal microphone, her manicured knuckles turning stark bone white under the intense stage lighting. She paced aggressively across the very edge of the elevated stage like a cornered rabid animal, pointing that perfectly painted acrylic nail directly at my face. "Look at her," Tasha screamed, her shrill, grating voice echoing violently off the high, gilded ceiling of the grand ballroom. "Look at this pathetic, miserable woman standing before you right now. She is absolutely nothing but a jealous, chronically depressed college dropout who has spent her entire miserable, pathetic life suffocating in the glorious golden shadow of her perfect sister." Tasha turned dramatically to face the audience, sweeping her free arm toward the stunned sea of prominent politicians and wealthy donors. She desperately wants you all to believe this elaborate, fabricated lie because her fragile, shattered mind simply cannot handle basic reality. When DeAndre married Chloe, he effortlessly elevated this entire family to a completely different stratosphere of immense wealth and social status. Chloe is elegant, poised, and universally beloved by Atlanta high society. And what exactly is Zora, a fundamentally broken, mentally unstable liability who could not even handle the basic rudimentary pressures of a standard university education? Tasha paused, panting heavily, her chest heaving visibly as she let her toxic, venomous words sink deep into the heavy, suffocating silence of the massive room. She locked her furious, burning eyes back onto me, her face twisting into a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. "We all know about your pathetic little breakdowns, Zora. We all perfectly know how you spent agonizing months hiding in your dark, miserable bedroom, weeping like a helpless child, while your mother desperately tried to hold your fragile life together. You dropped out of school because you are a fundamental, undeniable failure. You completely lack the intelligence, the drive, and the basic mental fortitude to ever succeed in the real world. And now you are standing on this stage, desperately trying to tear down a brilliant, hardworking man just because he chose to marry a winner instead of a pathetic loser like you." The audience watched in breathless, paralyzed shock as Tasha unleashed her vicious, highly calculated character assassination. She was ruthlessly weaponizing my deepest past vulnerabilities, twisting my private agonizing battle with depression into a disgusting public spectacle meant to completely discredit my forensic financial evidence. She desperately wanted the powerful crowd to view me not as a competent, independent businesswoman presenting undeniable facts, but as a deeply unhinged, emotionally volatile relative acting out a pathetic, jealous vendetta. It is a known psychological fact that deeply jealous, unstable individuals will completely fabricate evidence to destroy the people they bitterly envy. Tasha declared loudly, her voice practically dripping with fake performative authority. "Do not let her toxic, pathetic bitterness ruin this beautiful, charitable evening." She forged those bank statements. She manufactured this entire ridiculous scandal. She is completely psychopathically obsessed with tearing down my brother because she knows deep down she will never be good enough to stand in his presence. I stood perfectly still under the blinding, intense theatrical spotlights, my face an impenetrable icy mask of absolute calm. I did not flinch, I did not argue, and I certainly did not try to interrupt her frantic, screaming rant. I simply let Tasha completely exhaust herself, allowing her to proudly broadcast her vile, venomous true nature to every single prominent leader in the city. Her shrill voice eventually cracked, and she stood there panting heavily, gripping the microphone stand as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The grand ballroom was completely, terrifyingly silent. The wealthy donors and highly respected church elders shifted uncomfortably in their plush velvet seats, waiting anxiously to see how I would respond to such a deeply personal, viciously brutal public attack. I slowly raised my left hand, the small presentation remote, resting casually in my palm. I did not offer a single word of emotional defense. I did not attempt to validate or explain my past mental health struggles to a room full of gawking strangers. I simply pressed the small black button. The massive high-definition projector screen directly behind us instantly transitioned with a sharp digital flash. The previous church banking records vanished entirely, immediately replaced by a highly official, legally binding document from the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry. The bold, undeniable header at the very top of the pristine page read, Vance Horizons LLC. I lifted my microphone, bringing it slowly to my lips. My voice was deadly calm, slicing through the heavy, palpable tension in the room, like a perfectly sharpened surgical scalpel. You speak so passionately about my supposed failures and my alleged mental instability. Tasha, I said, my tone echoing with cold, unforgiving authority. But I highly prefer to rely strictly on verifiable documented facts. Let us carefully examine the incredible, undeniable success of your very own business ventures. I gestured toward the towering screen behind me. Vance Horizons, LLC. An independent consulting firm officially registered precisely 7 months ago. And right there, listed clearly on the binding state registry forms as the sole proprietor, the primary registered agent, and the exclusive financial beneficiary is none other than Tasha Vance. A low collective murmur of deep confusion began to ripple rapidly through the crowded ballroom. I clicked the remote a second time. A brand new document appeared on the right side of the massive split screen. It was an official, legally mandated campaign finance disclosure form bearing DeAndre's highly recognizable sweeping political signature at the very bottom. This specific document details the exact expenditures of DeAndre's current city council campaign, I explained, projecting my voice loud and clear to the very back of the massive venue. And right here, listed under primary campaign marketing and voter outreach, is a massive authorized wire transfer. $250,000 paid directly from DeAndre's hard-earned political war chest, straight into the private bank account of Vance Horizons, LLC. The low murmur in this grand ballroom instantly transformed into a sharp, rapidly escalating buzz of genuine, undeniable outrage. The wealthy political donors sitting at the velvet-roped VIP tables abruptly stopped whispering and began openly glaring at DeAndre, their faces twisting with sudden, furious realization. $250,000 is an absolutely staggering amount of money for basic campaign marketing. I continued pacing slowly across the edge of the stage, keeping my eyes locked dead on Tasha's completely panicked, quickly paling face. One would naturally assume that such a massive premium investment would yield incredible, highly visible results for this political race. Extensive television commercials, massive highway billboards, or perhaps a highly sophisticated digital outreach campaign targeting the entire 5th District. I stopped pacing and turned fully toward the audience, raising my hand to click the small remote one final devastating time. But Vance Horizons, LLC, never produced a single solitary piece of marketing material. I announced, my voice booming with cold, indisputable finality. There are absolutely no campaign ads anywhere. There are no strategically placed billboards. There is absolutely zero digital footprint, indicating any legitimate business activity whatsoever. Instead, I tracked exactly where every single dime of that $250,000 actually went. The massive screen flashed brilliantly, displaying two highly detailed, undeniably clear financial receipts. On the left was an exorbitant commercial lease agreement for a high-end luxury retail space in the most expensive shopping district in Buckhead, bearing Tasha's signature for her brand-new flashy designer boutique. On the right was an official stamped dealership invoice for a custom fully loaded jet black Mercedes G-Wagon purchased entirely in cash by Vance Horizons LLC exactly 3 days after the campaign wire transfer cleared. DeAndre did not pay for marketing, I declared loudly over the rising furious din of the outraged crowd. He used the generous, trusting contributions of every single donor in this room to personally finance his sister's luxury lifestyle. Complete, unadulterated chaos violently erupted across the grand ballroom. The bishop slammed his hands down hard on his table, rising to his feet, with an expression of pure biblical wrath, pointing a condemning finger directly at the stage. Wealthy campaign backers began shouting angrily, completely abandoning their expensive catered dinners, their voices blending into a deafening, furious roar of profound betrayal. They were loudly calling Tasha a shameless thief and demanding DeAndre face immediate criminal charges. DeAndre frantically scrambled backward, desperately clawing at the heavy curtains to escape the stage, but Roland's massive security team stood like impenetrable brick walls, blocking the audio-visual booth and every single exit. Suddenly, Vivian lunged violently out from the chaotic shadows of the stage wings. Seeing her meticulously curated social empire totally imploding, she threw herself directly between me and the furious crowd. Her eyes were completely wild, her face contorted in sheer, unhinged desperation. She pulled her arm back and violently slapped me directly across the face. The sharp, cracking sound echoed loudly through my microphone. "You ungrateful wretch!" Vivian screamed hysterically, spittle flying from her lips. "You owe this family absolutely everything. You stole your own college fund and blamed us." The sharp, violent crack of Vivian's palm striking my cheek echoed like a gunshot through the microphone, amplifying the sickening sound across the cavernous grand ballroom. The entire venue plunged into an absolute breathless silence. The clinking of silverware stopped. The angry murmurs died instantly. Hundreds of Atlanta's most elite citizens, from wealthy developers to the deeply respected Bishop Thomas, froze in collective horror, completely paralyzed by the sheer, unhinged physical assault unfolding on the main stage. I did not stumble. I did not flinch. I stood perfectly rooted to the polished hardwood floor, absorbing the stinging, burning impact of her heavy diamond rings, scraping against my skin. Slowly, methodically, I raised my hand and brushed my fingertips against my warming cheek. When I finally turned my gaze back to the woman who had birthed me, my eyes were entirely devoid of emotion, settling into a cold, lethal, uncompromising stare that made Vivian instinctively recoil. Roland's massive security guards immediately surged forward, their heavy boots thudding against the stage stairs, but I sharply raised my left hand, freezing them instantly in their tracks. I was absolutely not finished dismantling this family. Vivian realized her catastrophic miscalculation the very second her hand dropped. She had just physically assaulted her own daughter in front of the exact high society audience she had spent decades desperately trying to impress. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized her throat, but instead of apologizing or retreating into the shadows, Vivian doubled down on her toxic delusion. She frantically spun around to face the horrified crowd, her meticulously styled hair coming undone, her chest heaving as she decided to aggressively gaslight her way out of the crisis. "Do not look at her with sympathy," Vivian shrieked, pointing an accusing, trembling finger directly at my chest, her voice cracking with manufactured hysteria. "She is a deeply disturbed, pathological liar. She has spent her entire miserable life trying to destroy this family because she is hopelessly chronically flawed. Vivian paced frantically across the edge of the stage, directly addressing the bishop and the wealthy donors desperately trying to weave a protective web of deceit. My mother left Zora a beautiful, generous inheritance, $150,000 meant for her college education. And what did this ungrateful wretch do? She completely squandered it. She blew every single cent on cheap thrills, pathetic urban development hobbies, and failed ridiculous business ventures. She drained her own grandmother's sacred trust fund, dropped out of university because she lacked the basic intelligence to succeed, and then she aggressively blamed us for her own pathetic failures. She is standing up here fabricating these ridiculous financial documents because she is bitterly, psychotically jealous of Chloe's perfect, beautiful life. I let her scream. I let her parade her frantic, desperate lies in front of the entire city zoning committee. I waited until her lungs completely gave out and she was left gasping for air, clutching her heavy pearl necklace as she stared wildly at the silent, deeply uncomfortable audience. When she finally stopped, the silence was deafening. I smoothly reached into the front pocket of my designer hoodie and pulled out a sleek, silver flash drive. I did not look at Vivian. I did not address her pathetic, desperate rant. I simply turned back to the clear acrylic podium, located the main audiovisual port, and firmly plugged the drive directly into the system. Let us talk about that specific inheritance. Vivian, I said, my voice completely flat, radiating an absolute chilling authority that demanded total attention. The massive high-definition projector screen behind us flickered sharply. The previous images of Tasha's fraudulent luxury purchases vanished, replaced instantly by a stark, undeniably official banking document dating back exactly 10 years. This is the original, legally binding trust fund withdrawal form from Sovereign Heritage Bank. I announced, stepping to the side, so the entire ballroom had a completely unobstructed view of the damning evidence. As you can all clearly see, it authorizes the total immediate liquidation of the $150,000 educational trust left to me by my grandmother. I pointed a steady finger at the bottom right corner of the projected document. And right there, sitting on the primary authorization line, is my signature. A signature I absolutely never wrote, a signature that was flawlessly forged by my own mother. Vivian let out a strangled, terrified gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. But I was just getting started. I clicked the presentation remote, and a second document appeared right beside the forged withdrawal slip. It was a printed, time-stamped email exchange, complete with official corporate letterheads and routing numbers. I believe Mr. Preston Caldwell is sitting right there at table 4. I said, my voice slicing coldly through the room as I pointed directly at a distinguished silver-haired bank manager who instantly turned the color of spoiled milk. He tried to sink down into his velvet chair, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit. 10 years ago, Mr. Caldwell was a junior branch manager desperate to meet his quarterly quotas. I continued methodically exposing the deep systemic corruption, and as this email clearly details, he happily accepted a generous $5,000 under-the-table kickback to look the other way, while Vivian Davenport illegally transferred her 18-year-old daughter's entire inheritance into a private, untraceable offshore holding account. The email on the screen explicitly mapped out the illegal transaction, outlining Vivian's exact instructions to bypass the standard identity verification protocols. The crowd gasped collectively, turning their furious, disgusted stares directly toward the sweating, hyperventilating bank manager, who was now frantically loosening his expensive silk tie. "You stole from a child!" A prominent city councilwoman shouted from the front row, her voice ringing out with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You robbed your own flesh and blood." Vivian was physically shaking now, her carefully constructed high society persona shattering completely. She backed away from the screen, shaking her head in frantic, pathetic denial, but the digital evidence was absolute, undeniable, and legally binding. But the truly fascinating part of this forensic accounting is not the forgery itself, I stated, stepping aggressively back into the center spotlight, commanding the room with absolute precision. The real question is where exactly that $150,000 went, because it certainly did not go to my failed business ventures. I clicked the remote one final devastating time. The massive screen flashed, displaying a highly confidential, itemized ledger from an underground, highly illegal sports betting syndicate based out of Las Vegas. 10 years ago, DeAndre Vance was not a polished, ambitious future politician. I revealed my voice echoing with lethal, uncompromising finality. He was a reckless, deeply indebted 22-year-old with a massive, uncontrollable gambling addiction. He owed exactly $150,000 to people who were actively threatening to break his legs. The ledger on the screen clearly highlighted DeAndre's name, matching the exact debt amount to the exact dollar figure stolen from my grandmother's trust fund. I turned to look directly at DeAndre, who had completely collapsed against the back curtain, his face buried in his hands in absolute pathetic defeat. Vivian desperately needed DeAndre to be the perfect, debt-free, high society husband for her golden child, Chloe. I continued methodically peeling back the final, darkest layer of my family's toxic manufactured legacy. She needed that pristine political connection to secure her own social status. So, my mother made a strategic executive decision. She sacrificed my entire future, deliberately sabotaged my college education, and robbed me blind simply to buy a clean slate for the man who would eventually learn to steal from his own church congregation. You did not mentor me, Vivian. You did not save me. You sold me to buy a politician. The grand ballroom erupted into absolute uncontrolled chaos. The wealthy donors were screaming. The church elders were furiously dialing the police. Vivian collapsed straight onto her knees on the stage, weeping hysterically, her pearls scattering across the hardwood floor as her entire world burned to ash. Suddenly, a piercing, unhinged shriek tore through the deafening noise. Chloe, having watched her entire perfect, wealthy, highly curated illusion completely disintegrate before her very eyes, utterly snapped. She lunged violently across the VIP table, her hands shaking with pure, blinding, psychotic rage. She aggressively grabbed a heavy crystal wine glass filled to the brim with dark red Cabernet. She hurled it directly at the stage with all her strength. The heavy glass smashed violently against the edge of the acrylic podium, shattering into 1,000 glittering lethal shards, spraying dark red wine across my pristine white sneakers. "You are just mad he chose me!" Chloe screamed hysterically, her vocal cords tearing her face twisted into an ugly, unrecognizable mask of pure, desperate madness. "DeAndre loves me, and you are just a lonely, bitter spinster." Chloe stood amidst the glittering debris of the shattered crystal glass, her chest heaving violently under the expensive emerald silk of her designer gown. The dark red wine dripped slowly from the edge of the clear acrylic podium, pooling onto the polished hardwood floor, but her wild, manic eyes never left my face. She was completely unraveling in real time, desperately clinging to the manufactured hierarchy our mother had violently beaten into us since childhood. In Chloe's deeply fractured mind, she was the undisputed golden child, the flawless epitome of Atlanta high society, and I was absolutely nothing but the disgraceful, troubled scapegoat who existed solely to make her shine brighter by comparison. "Look at everything I have accomplished!" Chloe screeched, her voice reverberating shrilly off the cavernous ballroom walls, aggressively gesturing toward the sea of horrified faces watching her public meltdown. "I am the reigning president of the Junior League. I sit on the executive board of 4 different major philanthropic foundations. I live in a 10,000 square foot mansion in the absolute most exclusive gated community in Buckhead. I built a perfect, untouchable life while you were busy failing out of college and wallowing in your own pathetic misery." She aggressively thrust her left hand directly into the blinding glare of the theatrical spotlights, wildly waving her ring finger in my face. The massive, incredibly gaudy center stone caught the intense light, throwing sharp, synthetic sparkles across the dimly lit stage. "Look at this ring, Zora. Look at the undeniable proof of how much my husband cherishes me. DeAndre gave me the absolute best of everything because I earned it. I am a Davenport, and I carry this family's legacy with absolute flawless grace. You are standing up here, projecting these ridiculous fabricated banking documents because you simply cannot stomach the reality that I won. You have always been insanely pathologically jealous of me. You want my husband, you want my status, and you want my life. But you will never, ever have it because you are fundamentally broken. Her chest rose and fell in jagged, frantic gasps as she surveyed the silent, paralyzed room, desperately seeking a single face that still looked at her with the envy and adoration she constantly craved. But the wealthy donors and prominent politicians were simply staring at her with profound, sickening pity. They had just seen the undeniable forensic proof that her entire luxurious existence was entirely funded by money stolen from desperate low-income families and her own sister's hijacked college fund. Yet Chloe stubbornly, psychotically refused to acknowledge the giant glowing screen directly behind us. She doubled down, wrapping herself in a toxic, impenetrable blanket of absolute delusion, demanding that the crowd validate her superiority over me. I did not move a single muscle. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not attempt to match her unhinged, frantic energy. I slowly looked down at the dark crimson wine splattered across the pristine white leather of my designer sneakers and the heavy silk fabric of my oversized hoodie. I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, and methodically wiped the red droplets from my sleeve. Every single eye in the massive, dead, silent ballroom was locked entirely on my incredibly calm, deliberate movements. When I finally finished, I tucked the handkerchief away and lifted my gaze to meet my older sister's wild, terrified eyes. The look I gave her contained absolutely no anger, no jealousy, and no lingering sibling rivalry. It contained only pure, distilled, devastating pity. Chloe. I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal murmur that easily carried through the state-of-the-art sound system, chilling the very air in the room. I do not want your life. I would not wish your sad, pathetic, entirely manufactured life on my absolute worst enemy. She opened her mouth to scream another vicious insult, but I stepped smoothly forward, invading her physical space and forcing her to instinctively take a step back. I looked directly at the massive, sparkling rock sitting heavily on her left hand. You proudly flaunt that giant ring as undeniable proof of his undying devotion. I continued, my tone completely flat and merciless. But you might want to take that piece of metal to a qualified independent jeweler first thing tomorrow morning, because DeAndre secretly pawned the original flawless 3-carat diamond exactly 14 months ago to quietly cover a massive margin call on a terrible real estate investment. You are standing on a stage bragging about wearing a cubic zirconia. Chloe physically recoiled as if she had just been struck by lightning. She grabbed her left wrist, pulling the ring protectively against her chest, her eyes darting frantically toward DeAndre, who had gone completely rigid against the back curtain. But I was absolutely not done dismantling the toxic, parasitic illusion she had built her entire identity around. You love to brag about your perfect high society marriage, I said, my voice echoing relentlessly across the captivated, utterly silent congregation. You love posting those highly curated, heavily filtered photos of your supposedly flawless husband. But let us talk about the actual reality of your perfect marriage, Chloe. Let us talk about where your loving, devoted husband actually goes when he tells you he is working late on the city council campaign trail. Your perfect husband has not been home on a Tuesday night in 3 years. The implication hung heavily in the freezing air of the ballroom, thick and suffocating. Chloe's mouth fell open, her face draining of all remaining color as the crushing weight of my words finally began to penetrate her thick armor of denial. She looked back at DeAndre, and this time she did not see a powerful, protective, political savior. She saw a cornered, sweating, utterly exposed fraud. DeAndre realized with absolute horrifying certainty that his entire life was completely over. His political career was dead. His financial crimes were fully exposed to the city's most powerful people, and now his deepest, darkest personal secrets were about to be broadcast to his incredibly volatile image-obsessed wife. The paralyzing terror that had kept him pinned against the stage curtain suddenly snapped instantly, replaced by a frantic, violent surge of pure animalistic panic. He let out a desperate guttural roar and violently lunged forward away from the heavy velvet drapes. "Shut your mouth!" DeAndre screamed, sprinting wildly across the polished hardwood floor directly toward me. He was blindly reaching out, his hands formed into desperate claws, fully intending to tackle me to the ground and physically tear the microphone away from my face. He wanted to silence me by any violent means necessary, but he never even made it past the halfway point of the stage. Before DeAndre could close the distance, two of Roland Pierce's massive, highly trained private security guards moved with terrifying lethal speed. They had been silently waiting exactly for this specific moment. They intercepted the charging politician with flawless tactical precision. The first guard effortlessly grabbed DeAndre by his expensive suit jacket, halting his forward momentum completely. The second guard swept DeAndre's legs entirely out from under him. The impact was brutally loud as they drove the aspiring city councilman face first directly into the hard, unyielding floor of the stage. They pinned his arms sharply behind his back, pressing their heavy knees firmly into his spine, completely neutralizing the threat in less than 3 seconds. DeAndre thrashed and kicked violently against the floorboards, screaming muffled, desperate obscenities into the carpet, but the massive guards held him down as easily as if he were a misbehaving toddler. I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I watched the violent struggle with total icy detachment, waiting until DeAndre was completely subdued before I raised my left hand toward the terrified audio-visual technicians trapped inside the glass booth at the back of the room. "Play the video file labeled Midtown," I commanded, my voice ringing out with absolute, unquestionable authority over the sounds of DeAndre's muffled, desperate struggling. The giant high-definition screen behind me flickered out of the banking documents and instantly transitioned to a dark, grainy security camera feed. The timestamp in the corner indicated it was recorded late on a Tuesday night, exactly 3 weeks ago. The footage clearly showed the brightly lit, luxurious lobby of a highly exclusive high-rise condominium building located right in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. The camera angle shifted, and the entire ballroom collectively gasped as DeAndre Vance walked directly into the center of the frame. He was not attending a late-night political strategy session. He was laughing, looking completely intoxicated, and he was effortlessly carrying a stunning, incredibly young 22-year-old Instagram model bridal style straight through the opulent lobby. The young woman had her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, kissing him deeply as he carried her toward the private VIP elevators. The sheer, undeniable brazenness of the video was absolutely staggering. But I had one final lethal blow to deliver to my mother and sister's completely shattered social empire. "He is carrying her into a $5,000 a month luxury penthouse," I announced smoothly, ensuring every single person in the room absorbed the final brutal truth. A secret penthouse that DeAndre specifically leased under Chloe Vance's personal social security number. "When he defaults on the rent for his private cheating den next month, Chloe, you are the one who will be held entirely legally and financially responsible." The massive high-definition screen loomed over the dead-silent ballroom, broadcasting the damning security footage in a continuous, agonizing loop. The sheer visual clarity of the video left absolutely zero room for plausible deniability or desperate excuses. Chloe stood paralyzed for an agonizing moment, her eyes locked onto the towering image of her supposedly devoted husband passionately kissing another woman. Then her knees simply gave out. She collapsed onto the wine-soaked hardwood floor, her expensive emerald silk gown pooling around her as she stared up at the screen in pure, unadulterated horror. She could not scream. She could not weep. She was completely trapped in a state of absolute psychological shock. I looked down at her crouched form, feeling no joy, only the cold mechanical necessity of finishing what my family had started. I raised the microphone back to my lips, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the grand ballroom. "Meet Maya," I announced, projecting my words clearly across the stunned sea of elite guests. She is 22 years old, freshly graduated, and she was hired exactly 8 months ago to be DeAndre's primary campaign outreach aide. But her actual job description apparently involves far more personal late-night private consultations. DeAndre, still pinned firmly to the stage floor by Roland's massive security guards, let out a pathetic, muffled groan of absolute defeat. I clicked the remote, pulling up a fresh slide directly beside the looping security footage. It displayed a highly detailed, legally binding rental agreement for the Midtown luxury penthouse. DeAndre did not simply have a cliché affair with a much younger subordinate, I explained, methodically breaking down his ultimate betrayal. He methodically and intentionally committed aggravated identity theft against his own wife to finance his disgusting double life. Look closely at the primary applicant's signature on the lease agreement. Look at the attached credit check and the associated bank routing numbers. Every single piece of financial documentation used to secure this $5,000 a month secret love nest was executed using Chloe Vance's personal social security number and her private financial credentials. He forged her signature on the lease. He bypassed the standard credit verification by using her pristine high society financial standing, and he set up an automatic monthly draft directly from her personal checking account. Chloe, still kneeling on the shattered glass, and spilled wine wrapped her arms around her stomach as if she had just been physically gutted. You have spent the last 3 years parading around Atlanta, boasting about your incredibly devoted, wildly successful husband, providing you with the ultimate luxury lifestyle. I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly. You constantly mocked my independence while bragging about your flawless marriage. But the entire time, your perfect husband was actively destroying your personal credit score and draining your private accounts to comfortably house his young campaign aide in one of the most expensive zip codes in the entire city. The wealthy donors and powerful political allies sitting at the velvet-roped tables began whispering frantically, their initial shock rapidly morphing into profound, disgusted outrage. A man who would steal his own wife's identity to fund an affair was a massive radioactive political liability. But the sheer magnitude of DeAndre's financial depravity did not stop at a single luxury apartment lease. I gripped the presentation remote and clicked the button once again. The screen instantly transitioned to display a set of highly classified, extremely complex property deeds and real estate documents. The bold, undeniable header on the primary document read, Buckhead Family Estate. Let us take a much closer look at the actual foundation of your pristine, untouchable social empire, I declared, directing my attention toward Vivian, who was still kneeling near the shattered podium, clutching her pearl necklace in absolute terror. You constantly brag to every single country club associate and junior league committee member about your magnificent, sprawling, fully paid-off mansion. You treat that house as the ultimate undeniable symbol of Davenport generational wealth and superiority. But keeping up the appearance of a powerful billionaire lifestyle requires an absolutely massive amount of liquid cash. I tapped the remote, highlighting 3 specific, incredibly damning sections on the projected property deeds. When DeAndre realized that stealing from the church housing fund and draining Chloe's checking accounts was simply not enough to cover his extravagant campaign spending and his demanding mistress, he turned to his ultimate safety net. He secretly leveraged the very roof over your heads. The crowd gasped loudly as the financial reality of the documents became undeniably clear. Without Vivian or Chloe ever knowing, DeAndre methodically executed 3 separate, massive, high-interest mortgages against the Buckhead family estate, I explained, laying out the irrefutable forensic evidence for the entire city to see. He used his position as the supposed financial head of the household to forge your signatures on multiple loan applications, using the family mansion as direct collateral to secure millions of dollars in predatory, high-interest cash loans. The first mortgage covered his massive mounting gambling debts. The second mortgage was funneled directly into the fake consulting shell company to buy his sister Tasha's silence and complicity. And the third most recent mortgage was entirely liquidated to fund this exact political campaign and his secret double life. He effectively gambled away your multi-million-dollar generational home to finance a cheap, pathetic illusion of power. The documents clearly displayed the staggering, undeniable numbers. The total debt accumulated against the property was astronomical, carrying aggressive, predatory interest rates that were compounding daily. DeAndre had literally signed away their entire future to preserve his fake hollow image. The crushing absolute reality of the situation violently slammed into Vivian like a runaway freight train. She stared up at the massive projector screen, her eyes wide and manic, as her brain finally processed the catastrophic financial numbers displayed in bold black ink. Her pristine, untouchable, multi-million-dollar Buckhead sanctuary was completely and utterly underwater. They did not own a single brick of that sprawling estate anymore. They were millions of dollars in active, inescapable debt, and the predatory lenders would undoubtedly be foreclosing on the property within weeks. The prestigious Davenport legacy she had violently sacrificed my entire college fund to protect was completely dead and buried. DeAndre, still pressed forcefully against the stage floorboards by the unyielding weight of Roland's security team, suddenly began thrashing with renewed desperate violence. His meticulously styled suit was ruined. His face flushed a dark, furious crimson as he realized the absolute totality of his ruin. He twisted his head toward the side of the stage where his sister was still gripping the secondary microphone stand in pure shock. "Tasha, call the police right now!" DeAndre screamed hysterically, his voice cracking with absolute raw panic. "Call the cops immediately. She illegally hacked into my secure private financial files. She breached classified banking systems to get these documents. Have her arrested for federal cybercrime. Do it right now." Tasha snapped out of her paralyzed daze. She practically lunged for her expensive designer handbag, frantically digging through it until she produced her smartphone. Her hands were shaking so violently, she almost dropped the device as she aggressively punched in the 3 digits. "Yes, I need the police at the Crown Sovereign Hotel immediately." Tasha shrieked into her phone, her voice echoing shrilly across the completely chaotic ballroom. "There is a deranged, psychopathic woman holding hundreds of people hostage on stage. She is actively hacking into federal banking systems and displaying highly classified stolen financial documents to the public. You need to send every officer you have. She is completely out of her mind and extremely dangerous." The wealthy donors and politicians were already scrambling frantically toward the grand exit doors, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the imploding Vance campaign. Within seconds of Tasha's frantic screaming phone call, the faint, undeniable sound of approaching police sirens began to wail loudly in the distance, quickly growing louder and more intense as multiple squad cars rapidly approached the hotel. Vivian slowly pulled herself up from the floor, her elegant gown wrinkled and stained. She looked at me, her face completely drained of sanity, a terrifying, unhinged smile spreading across her lips. She began to laugh, a harsh, grating, hysterical sound that cut through the wailing sirens outside. "You are going to federal prison, Zora." Vivian cackled wildly, her eyes burning with pure toxic malice. "You illegally hacked into those accounts, and I will personally testify against you. I will make absolutely sure you rot in a cell for the rest of your miserable life." The deafening shriek of approaching sirens violently shattered whatever tension remained in the grand ballroom. The flashing red and blue lights sliced aggressively through the towering floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the horrified faces of Atlanta's elite in alternating shades of neon panic. Heavy, synchronized footsteps thudded aggressively against the marble foyer outside, growing louder and more intimidating with every passing second. The heavy oak double doors at the back of the ballroom were suddenly thrust open with explosive force. 6 uniformed Atlanta Police Department officers stormed into the venue, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts, scanning the chaotic scene with sharp, tactical precision. They were led by a tall, broad-shouldered detective in a rumpled gray trench coat, his hardened eyes immediately locking onto the unhinged spectacle unfolding on the main stage. The very second the officers crossed the threshold, Vivian executed a flawless, terrifyingly rapid emotional pivot. The toxic, malicious cackling that had just been tearing from her throat vanished completely instantly, replaced by the trembling, fragile sobs of a terrified victim. She aggressively wiped the malicious grin off her face, contorting her features into an absolute mask of maternal panic and trauma. "Officers, thank God you are here!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking with perfectly manufactured hysteria as she pointed a violently shaking finger directly at my chest. "That woman is completely deranged. She is a dangerous cybercriminal. She just illegally breached federal banking systems and is displaying highly classified financial data to terrorize my family." Tasha, sensing the exact narrative shift her brother desperately needed, immediately joined forces with my mother. She lunged forward, placing herself dramatically between the approaching officers and the stage, her own tears flowing with practiced ease. "You have to arrest her immediately," Tasha cried out, pointing frantically at the stage where Roland's security guards still had DeAndre firmly pinned to the floorboards. She organized a physical assault on a sitting city councilman. Her thugs tackled my brother to the ground completely unprovoked. She is trying to destroy his political campaign with fabricated stolen documents. Handcuff her right now, before she hurts anyone else. The wealthy donors and church elders whispered frantically among themselves, physically backing away from the central aisle to give the advancing police officers a wide berth. The collective tension in the room was absolute, a suffocating, breathless anticipation as the high society crowd waited to see me dragged out of the luxury hotel in chains. Vivian shot me a venomous, triumphant glare through her fake tears, absolutely certain that her weaponized white tears and high society status had successfully turned the authorities against her disgraced scapegoat of a daughter. She genuinely believed her manufactured victimhood was an impenetrable shield. The lead detective did not even break his stride. He completely ignored Vivian's theatrical heaving sobs. He walked straight past Tasha, absolutely unfazed by her frantic screaming demands for my immediate arrest. He did not issue a single command to his officers to draw their weapons, and he did not order Roland's men to release the disgraced politician currently eating the stage floor. The detective marched directly up the central steps of the stage, his heavy boots echoing with absolute authority, and stopped exactly 2 feet in front of my podium. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands in surrender, and I certainly did not attempt to plead my innocence to the room. I maintained my icy, uncompromising composure, reaching down into the heavy leather tote bag resting at my feet. I smoothly pulled out a massive, thick physical dossier bound by thick rubber bands and sealed with red evidence tape. I stepped around the shattered crystal and spilled wine, extending the heavy file directly into the detective's waiting hands. "Detective Miller," I said, my voice radiating an absolute chilling calm that made Vivian's fake sobbing hitch in her throat. "You are exactly on time. Everything we discussed is fully documented inside, complete with the unredacted offshore routing numbers and the time-stamped casino ledgers." The detective gave me a curt professional nod, accepting the heavy dossier with both hands. "Excellent work, Zora," he replied, his deep voice carrying easily over the microphones. "The Bureau appreciates your thoroughness." Vivian's fake tears stopped instantly. Her mouth fell open in an ugly, gaping circle of profound, absolute shock. Tasha stumbled backward, her eyes darting wildly between the detective and the thick file in his hands. "You think I stood up here today and recklessly committed federal cybercrime just to settle a petty family grudge, Vivian?" I asked, turning my lethal gaze back to my mother, methodically dismantling her last remaining delusion. "You think I am stupid enough to leave a digital footprint that you could use to throw me in a prison cell?" I shook my head, my expression completely devoid of mercy. 6 months ago, when I first noticed the glaring discrepancies in the community housing fund ledgers, I did not just snoop around in the dark. I went straight to the federal building downtown. I sat in a sterile room with the FBI's white-collar crime division, and I handed them the initial thread of DeAndre's massive embezzlement scheme. The entire ballroom erupted into a deafening chorus of shocked gasps. Chloe, still slumped on the floor in her wine-stained gown, let out a strangled, pathetic whimper. I have not been hacking anyone, I revealed, sealing their catastrophic fate with absolute precision. I have been acting as a fully authorized, documented, confidential informant for the federal government. Every single financial document I projected onto that screen tonight was obtained through legal federal subpoenas. I planted the digital tracking software that allowed the authorities to monitor every single wire transfer DeAndre made to Tasha's fake consulting shell companies. I mapped the exact route the stolen church funds took to reach the underground sports betting syndicates in Las Vegas. You brought the police here tonight, hoping they would arrest me, Tasha. But they are not here for me. They have been waiting in the parking garage for my specific signal. Detective Miller flipped open the thick dossier briefly, verifying the signed warrants resting on top of the financial evidence. He snapped the folder shut and turned his steely gaze downward, looking directly at the sweating, hyperventilating politician still pinned firmly to the hardwood floor. He gave a sharp, definitive nod to Roland's security guards. The massive men immediately stepped back, hauling a completely broken, violently trembling DeAndre Vance roughly to his feet. DeAndre's expensive tailored suit was hopelessly wrinkled, his tie was torn, and his face was pale with absolute inescapable terror. DeAndre Vance. Detective Miller announced, his booming voice echoing with absolute uncompromising legal authority. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, aggravated identity theft, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. DeAndre did not fight back. He did not utter a single word of defense. His legs completely gave out beneath him, his entire body going limp as two uniformed APD officers aggressively grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back. The sharp, heavy metallic click of police handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed violently through the dead silent ballroom. Detective Miller immediately pivoted, locking his hardened eyes on Tasha, who was now backing away toward the emergency exit, shaking her head in frantic, pathetic denial. Tasha Vance, the detective, continued signaling two more officers who instantly moved to block her escape path. You are under arrest for corporate money laundering, accessory to grand larceny, and federal conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Tasha let out a piercing, hysterical scream as the officers forcefully grabbed her wrists, pulling them sharply behind her back. I did not do anything, she wailed wildly, thrashing against the officers as the cold steel cuffs locked securely around her wrists. He made me do it. DeAndre forced me to set up those accounts. I am a victim. The sheer magnitude of the public spectacle finally broke the paralyzing shock holding the audience captive. The massive crowd of wealthy donors, respected church elders, and prominent political figures suddenly surged forward in an absolute, uncontrolled frenzy. Hundreds of expensive smartphones were instantly thrust into the air. Camera flashes erupted across the dim ballroom like aggressive strobe lights, capturing every single humiliating second of DeAndre and Tasha Vance being walked off the main stage in federal handcuffs. The carefully curated, highly pristine Davenport and Vance social empires were being permanently immortalized as a catastrophic criminal disgrace. Vivian watched the flashing cameras and the handcuffed politician being dragged away, and the final structural pillar of her sanity completely shattered. The multi-million-dollar Buckhead estate was gone. The prestigious political connections were dead. The pristine, high-society legacy she had sacrificed her own daughter to build was entirely incinerated. The malicious, arrogant pride that had defined my mother her entire life vanished in an instant. Vivian dropped heavily to her hands and knees. Her meticulous hair hung in wild, disheveled strands around her face. Her expensive pearl necklace dragged across the wine-soaked floorboards. Slowly, pathetically, she crawled forward across the shattered glass, her hands reaching out with desperate, pathetic urgency until her trembling fingers grasped the pristine white fabric of my sneakers. "Zora, please," Vivian sobbed. Her voice reduced to a ragged, begging croak as she looked up at me from the dirt. "Please, you have to stop this. You have to tell them we did not know about the mortgages. You have to save the house. Please, Zora, you are the only one who can fix this. I am begging you." Detective Miller's booming voice entirely drowned out my mother's pathetic begging, echoing with absolute uncompromising finality across the cavernous ballroom. He recited the Miranda rights with a practiced mechanical rhythm, each legally binding syllable striking DeAndre and Tasha like physical blows. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The heavy metallic click of the handcuffs securing their wrists served as the definitive punctuation to the end of their manufactured empires. DeAndre Vance, the charismatic golden boy of Atlanta politics, was utterly unrecognizable. The polished, arrogant swagger that had defined his entire public existence had completely evaporated, leaving behind a broken, weeping shell of a man. Tears streamed freely down his face, mixing with sweat and snot, as he violently sobbed, his chin dropping to his chest in a desperate, futile attempt to hide his face from the hundreds of glaring spectators. Tasha was far less subdued. She thrashed wildly against the grip of the APD officers, her expensive designer heels slipping on the polished hardwood as she shrieked obscenities, desperately trying to pin the entirety of the blame on her brother. "I was just the consultant," she wailed hysterically, her carefully styled hair whipping around her face in an unkempt mess. "He made the transfers. I am completely innocent. He forced me to sign those papers." The officers ignored her frantic protests, hauling them both down the central stage stairs and marching them directly through the middle of the grand ballroom. The walk of shame was absolute, highly public, and devastating. The wealthy real estate developers, the deeply respected church elders, and the elite political donors who had happily written massive campaign checks just an hour ago now turned their backs in sheer disgust. Hundreds of cell phone cameras remained hoisted high in the air, recording every single humiliating second of the perp walk. The massive oak doors of the ballroom swung open, revealing a chaotic scene outside the Crown Sovereign Hotel. Word of the FBI sting had clearly leaked to the press. A fleet of local news vans had already mounted the curb, their heavy satellite dishes extended into the night sky. Blinding camera flashes erupted in a relentless, aggressive strobe effect as the police dragged the disgraced politician through the revolving glass doors. Reporters shoved microphones aggressively toward DeAndre's tear-stained face, shouting rapid-fire questions about the embezzled church funds and the secret penthouse. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the massive smiling campaign posters of DeAndre Vance plastered across the hotel entryway, creating a stark, almost poetic contrast as the officers shoved his head down and forced him into the back of a squad car. His political and social life was officially permanently dead. Inside the ballroom, the deafening chaos of the arrest began to fade, leaving a hollow, ringing silence in its wake. But at my feet, the nightmare was rapidly shifting into a new, incredibly toxic phase. Vivian was still firmly planted on the hardwood floor, her manicured fingers gripping my ankles with a desperate, suffocating strength. Her previous demands for police intervention had completely dissolved instantly, replaced by a frantic, entirely self-serving financial panic. She stared up at me, her meticulously applied makeup ruined by streaks of mascara, her heavy pearl necklace broken and scattered across the stage. She did not offer a single word of apology for physically assaulting me, nor did she express any genuine remorse for stealing my inheritance to fund a criminal enterprise. Instead, Vivian launched directly into the ultimate, deeply manipulative guilt trip, violently weaponizing the very family legacy she had just destroyed. "Zora, you have to listen to me," Vivian pleaded, her voice trembling with an ugly, demanding entitlement. "The police have DeAndre, but the bank still holds those fraudulent mortgages. You cannot let them take the Buckhead estate. That house represents generations of Davenport excellence. It is the absolute pinnacle of the Black elite in this city. If we lose that property, our family name will be permanently ruined. We will be the laughingstock of the entire country club. The society papers will drag our name through the mud for decades." She yanked aggressively on the hem of my pants, desperately trying to force me to look her in the eye. I know exactly who you are partnered with now. Zora, I know about your company and your billionaire connections. You have access to unlimited capital. You can easily pay off the bank by tomorrow morning. You can completely wipe out those mortgages and buy the estate back free and clear. Her voice rose to a shrill, hysterical pitch, fully believing that her status as my mother entitled her to my complete financial salvation. I am your mother. Zora. You owe this family. You cannot just stand there and let us lose everything when you have the power to fix it with a single phone call. You have to save us. It is your duty to protect the Davenport legacy. Before I could even process the sheer breathtaking audacity of Vivian's demands, another figure crawled frantically across the stage. Chloe, her expensive emerald silk gown, completely ruined by the spilled Cabernet and shattered glass, scrambled to her mother's side. She looked absolutely feral, her eyes wide and manic, her chest heaving with desperate, ragged gasps. Having just watched her husband arrested for aggravated identity theft, and her entire luxury lifestyle instantly vaporized, Chloe immediately adopted the role of the ultimate blameless victim. She reached out her shaking hands, grabbing the edge of my hoodie, her fingernails digging aggressively into the fabric. She is right, Zora. Chloe sobbed hysterically, tears streaming down her face, as she looked up at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated greed disguised as panic. I am a victim in all of this. DeAndre lied to me. He stole my identity and completely destroyed my credit. I had absolutely no idea he was running a fake consulting firm or buying penthouses for a campaign aide. You cannot punish me for his crimes. She tugged violently on my clothes completely, ignoring the fact that she had just hurled a crystal glass at my head less than 10 minutes ago. You have to write the check, Zora. You have to pay off those mortgages right now. If the bank forecloses on the estate, I will be completely homeless. Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to show my face at the junior league if I am living in some pathetic, cheap apartment? You have billions of dollars at your disposal. Paying off a few million in debt is absolutely nothing to you. You have to fix my life. The absolute staggering entitlement radiating from the two women at my feet was almost suffocating. They were kneeling in the wreckage of a massive multi-million-dollar federal crime scene, surrounded by the shattered remnants of their own toxic hubris, and yet they still fundamentally lacked any capacity for self-reflection. They did not see me as a sister or a daughter. They did not see me as a human being who had survived their relentless, lifelong emotional abuse. They looked up at me and saw nothing but a highly convenient financial utility, an unlimited human ATM designed to fund their fake, lavish existence and shield them from the severe consequences of their own actions. I stared down at Vivian and Chloe, feeling a profound, icy calm settle permanently over my heart. I slowly reached down, firmly prying their desperate, grasping fingers off my clothing. I stepped deliberately backward, fully and completely detaching myself from their toxic grip, ensuring there was a clear physical boundary between my reality and their utter delusion. "Pay off the bank," I asked, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that carried effortlessly through the quiet ballroom. "Mom, you really have not been paying attention to what my company actually does." Heavy, synchronized boots began to echo violently in the marble hallway outside, a sharp, terrifying sound that completely shattered the lingering whispers of the stunned crowd. The heavy double doors at the back of the grand ballroom were thrust open with explosive, unapologetic force, slamming against the walls as 6 Atlanta Police Department officers stormed into the venue. They moved with aggressive, tactical precision, their hands resting securely on their duty belts, as their eyes immediately scanned the absolute chaos of the room. They were led by a tall, broad-shouldered detective in a rumpled gray trench coat, his hardened, uncompromising gaze instantly locking onto the unhinged spectacle unfolding on the main stage. The very second the officers crossed the threshold, Vivian executed a flawless, terrifyingly rapid emotional pivot. The toxic, malicious cackling that had just been tearing from her throat vanished completely. She aggressively wiped the unhinged, hysterical grin off her face, instantly contorting her features into an absolute mask of maternal panic and trauma. She was suddenly the fragile, terrified victim. "Officers, thank God you are here!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking with perfectly manufactured hysteria as she pointed a violently shaking finger directly at my chest. "That woman is completely deranged. She is a dangerous cybercriminal. She just illegally breached federal banking systems and is actively displaying highly classified financial data to terrorize my family." Tasha, sensing the exact narrative shift her brother desperately needed to survive this disaster, immediately joined forces with my mother. She practically lunged forward, placing herself dramatically between the advancing officers and the stage, her own tears flowing with practiced manipulative ease. "You have to arrest her immediately," Tasha cried out, pointing frantically at the stage, where Roland's massive security guards still had DeAndre firmly pinned to the floorboards. She organized a violent physical assault on a sitting city councilman. Her thugs tackled my brother to the ground completely unprovoked. She is committing corporate espionage and trying to destroy his political campaign with fabricated stolen documents. Handcuff her right now before she hurts anyone else. The wealthy donors and highly respected church elders whispered frantically among themselves, physically backing away from the central aisle to give the advancing police officers a wide berth. The collective tension in the room was absolute, a suffocating, breathless anticipation as the high society crowd waited to see me dragged out of the luxury hotel in chains. Vivian shot me a venomous, triumphant glare through her fake tears, absolutely certain that her weaponized victimhood and untouchable high society status had successfully turned the authorities against her disgraced scapegoat of a daughter. She genuinely believed her manufactured outrage was an impenetrable shield that would save her pristine legacy. The lead detective did not even break his stride. He completely ignored Vivian's theatrical heaving sobs, stepping around her kneeling form as if she were nothing more than a minor obstacle. He walked straight past Tasha, absolutely unfazed by her frantic, screaming demands for my immediate arrest. He did not issue a single command to his officers to draw their weapons, and he certainly did not order Roland's men to release the disgraced politician currently eating the stage floor. The detective marched directly up the central steps of the stage, his heavy boots echoing with absolute authority, and stopped exactly 2 feet in front of my podium. I did not run. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not attempt to plead my innocence to the room. I maintained my icy, uncompromising composure, reaching down into the heavy leather tote bag resting near my feet. I smoothly pulled out a massive, thick physical dossier, bound by heavy rubber bands and completely sealed with red evidence tape. I stepped around the shattered crystal and spilled wine, extending the heavy file directly into the detective's waiting hands. "Detective Miller," I said, my voice radiating an absolute chilling calm that made Vivian's fake sobbing hitch violently in her throat. "You are exactly on time. Everything we discussed is fully documented inside, complete with the unredacted offshore routing numbers and the time-stamped casino ledgers." The detective gave me a curt, professional nod, accepting the heavy dossier with both hands. "Excellent work, Zora," he replied, his deep voice carrying easily over the microphones. "The Bureau appreciates your thoroughness." Vivian's fake tears stopped instantly. Her mouth fell open in an ugly, gaping circle of profound, absolute shock. Tasha stumbled backward, her eyes darting wildly between the detective and the thick file in his hands. "You think I stood up here today and recklessly committed federal cybercrime just to settle a petty family grudge, Vivian?" I asked, turning my lethal gaze back to my mother, methodically dismantling her last remaining delusion. I shook my head, my expression completely devoid of mercy. 6 months ago, when I first noticed the glaring discrepancies in the community housing fund ledgers, I did not just hack into random servers. I went straight to the federal building downtown. I sat in a secure room with the FBI's white-collar crime division, and I handed them the initial thread of DeAndre's massive embezzlement scheme. I have been acting as a fully authorized, documented, confidential informant to track the embezzled church funds. Every single financial document I projected onto that screen tonight was obtained through legal federal subpoenas. I planted the digital tracking software that allowed the authorities to monitor every single wire transfer DeAndre made to Tasha's fake consulting shell companies. I mapped the exact route the stolen money took to reach the underground sports betting syndicates in Las Vegas. The entire ballroom erupted into a deafening chorus of shocked, horrified gasps. The undeniable reality of the federal investigation slammed into the crowd, instantly vaporizing any lingering doubts about DeAndre's guilt. Detective Miller flipped open the thick physical dossier, briefly verifying the signed federal warrants resting neatly on top of the financial evidence. He snapped the heavy folder shut and turned his steely, uncompromising gaze downward, looking directly at the sweating, hyperventilating politician, still pinned firmly to the hardwood floorboards. He gave a sharp, definitive nod to Roland's security guards. The massive men immediately stepped back, hauling a completely broken, violently trembling DeAndre Vance roughly to his feet. DeAndre Vance, Detective Miller announced, his booming voice echoing with absolute, unyielding legal authority. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." DeAndre did not fight back. He did not utter a single word of defense or denial. His legs completely gave out beneath him, his entire body going limp as two uniformed APD officers aggressively grabbed his arms, twisting them forcefully behind his back. Detective Miller immediately pivoted, locking his hardened eyes on Tasha, who was now backing away toward the emergency exit, shaking her head in frantic, pathetic denial. Tasha Vance, the detective, continued signaling two more officers who instantly moved to block her escape path. "You are under arrest for money laundering and conspiracy." Tasha let out a piercing, hysterical scream as the officers forcefully grabbed her wrists. "I did not do anything," she wailed wildly, thrashing against the officers. "He made me do it. I am a victim." The sharp, heavy metallic click of police handcuffs ratcheting tightly around DeAndre and Tasha's wrists echoed violently through the dead-silent ballroom. That sharp mechanical sound finally broke the paralyzing shock, holding the audience captive. The massive crowd of wealthy donors and political figures suddenly surged forward in an absolute, uncontrolled frenzy. Hundreds of expensive smartphones were instantly thrust into the air. Camera flashes erupted across the dim ballroom like aggressive strobe lights, capturing every single humiliating second of the imploding golden boy being dragged away in federal chains. Vivian watched the flashing cameras and the handcuffed politician, and the final structural pillar of her sanity completely shattered. The pristine high society legacy she had sacrificed everything to build was entirely dead. The malicious, arrogant pride that had defined my mother her entire life vanished in an instant. Vivian dropped heavily to her hands and knees. Her meticulous hair hung in wild strands around her face. Slowly, pathetically, she crawled forward across the shattered glass, her trembling hands reaching out with desperate urgency until her fingers grasped the pristine white fabric of my shoes. She looked up at me completely broken, ready to beg for the ultimate favor. "Davenport. Capital does not just build affordable housing," I stated, my words ringing out with crystal clear surgical articulation. "We are a highly aggressive, deeply capitalized private equity firm. We specialize in hostile acquisitions, corporate restructuring, and liquidating toxic assets. When I first uncovered the staggering predatory interest rates attached to those 3 illicit mortgages DeAndre secretly took out against the Buckhead estate, I did not just hand the raw financial data over to the federal authorities. I looked at the absolute catastrophic wreckage of your unhinged greed, and I saw a highly lucrative business opportunity." Vivian stared up at me from the floorboards, her tear-streaked face frozen in a mask of total incomprehension. Her brain, entirely wired to understand only country club gossip and superficial social climbing, was violently struggling to process the cold, hard financial terminology I was weaponizing against her. The offshore lenders DeAndre used were completely unregulated and incredibly dangerous. I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly through the silent, captivated ballroom. When the FBI began circling his fake shell companies, those predatory lenders panicked. A disgraced high-profile politician, actively under federal investigation, defaulting on millions of dollars in high-interest loans, is a massive radioactive liability for any financial institution. They were absolutely desperate to offload the risk before the federal indictments dropped. They wanted out immediately. So my partners and I gladly took the heavy burden entirely off their hands. Chloe let out a sharp, confused gasp, her hands dropping from my shoes as the terrifying reality of my words began to cast a dark shadow over her manic entitlement. "We buy distressed debt," I declared, dropping the final earth-shattering payoff with absolutely zero mercy. "The bank does not own your mortgages anymore, Mom. I do. I bought your debt exactly 3 days ago." The sheer paralyzing terror that instantly washed over Vivian and Chloe was absolute. They gasped in unison, the sound sharp and ragged, like all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the grand ballroom. Vivian's hands began to shake uncontrollably. Her pristine multi-million-dollar sanctuary, the undeniable crown jewel of the Davenport social empire, the sprawling estate she had ruthlessly sacrificed my entire college fund to protect, was entirely in my hands. I owned the paper. I held the deed. I was the sole uncontested primary lien holder on her entire existence. "So you can just forgive the debt?" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with a desperate, hysterical brand of delusion. "You own the loans. You can just cancel them. You can wipe the slate clean and give us the house back. You have the power to fix this right now." I looked down at my older sister, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical pity for her profound ignorance. "You are completely and irreversibly in default," I explained, delivering the uncompromising terms with icy, mechanical precision. "The loans are severely delinquent, the collateral is hopelessly tied to a federal embezzlement scheme, and the compounding interest has entirely eclipsed the actual market value of the property. I am not forgiving a single cent. I am officially, legally foreclosing on the Buckhead estate effective immediately." Vivian let out a strangled, guttural sound, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as her entire world violently collapsed around her. "The eviction papers were filed with the county clerk this morning." I continued, my voice slicing through their mounting hysteria like a finely sharpened blade. "The property is officially locked down. My private security contractors are already stationed at the front gates of the estate, and the locks on every single door have been changed. You are no longer the wealthy, untouchable matriarchs of Atlanta society. You are trespassers living on borrowed time. I am giving you exactly 48 hours. 48 hours. Vivian gasped, her eyes bulging with absolute raw panic. "What are you talking about? You cannot do this. You have exactly 48 hours to pack whatever personal items fit into 2 standard suitcases," I commanded, laying down the absolute non-negotiable terms of their ruin. "You may take your clothes and your basic necessities, every single piece of expensive art, every antique chandelier, every piece of imported designer furniture, and every luxury vehicle parked in that driveway now legally belongs to Davenport Capital. It will all be meticulously inventoried and systematically liquidated at public auction to recoup the stolen funds and satisfy the outstanding debt. If you attempt to steal, hide, or destroy a single asset on your way out the door, I will personally see to it that you join DeAndre and Tasha in a federal holding cell. 48 hours, then the sheriffs will physically remove you from my property." "You are a monster!" Vivian suddenly screamed, the fragile, weeping victim facade completely shattering as a wave of pure, toxic hatred distorted her features. She pulled herself up from the wine-soaked floor, her fists clenched at her sides, her voice tearing through her throat in an unhinged, feral shriek. "You are a disgusting, vindictive monster. How could you do this to your own family? How could you destroy your own mother? You are pure evil." I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic, screaming energy. I simply stood at the podium, perfectly composed, delivering my final monologue with a quiet, devastating power that sliced directly through decades of untreated generational trauma. "You called me a failure because I did not fit into your fake, socially acceptable box." I stated, my words ringing with absolute, undeniable truth. "You demanded absolute perfection, but your version of perfection was nothing more than a hollow, fragile illusion built entirely on lies, theft, and overwhelming debt. You looked at my independence, my intelligence, and my refusal to bow to your toxic country club standards, and you labeled me a disgrace. Vivian opened her mouth to scream another insult, but my voice cut her off, commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. You broke me, I continued, staring directly into my mother's terrified, manic eyes. You stole my college fund to finance a lavish lifestyle you could never actually afford. You actively enabled my sister to treat me like garbage. You welcomed a deeply corrupt, manipulative criminal into this family with open arms, and you happily abandoned your own daughter to protect his political image. You sacrificed my future to preserve your lies. I looked down at Chloe, who was now weeping silently into her hands, completely shattered by the reality of her impending homelessness and absolute social ruin. Today, I am cutting the rot out of my life, I declared, my voice echoing with a profound, unyielding finality. I am severing the disease that has infected this family for generations. You are no longer my mother, and you are no longer my sister. You are simply two strangers who owe my company a massive amount of money. Your 48 hours starts right now. I took a deliberate step back from the podium. I looked out over the sprawling, dead-silent ballroom, making eye contact with the stunned politicians, the horrified donors, and the whispering socialites. They had witnessed the absolute systematic dismantling of a corrupt empire. The truth was fully exposed, the lies were completely incinerated, and the toxic cycle was permanently broken. I dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage floorboards with a heavy, resounding thud that echoed like a final gunshot through the cavernous venue. I did not wait to see if Vivian would scream again. I did not stay to watch Chloe collapse into a puddle of absolute despair. I simply turned my back on my screaming, completely ruined family. Roland Pierce stepped smoothly up to the stage, his massive, imposing presence offering a silent, undeniable shield of protection. He gave me a brief, respectful nod, falling perfectly into step beside me. I walked down the main stage stairs, my head held high, my posture radiating an absolute, untouchable power. As I approached the center aisle of the grand ballroom, the massive crowd of Atlanta's elite immediately parted. They scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the velvet-roped tables, completely clearing a wide, unobstructed path for me to exit. Nobody whispered a single insult. Nobody dared to utter a word of defense for the Davenport family. They simply watched in sheer, terrified awe as I walked straight down the center aisle, leaving the wreckage, the lies, and the toxic past behind me forever.